My family stole my $8,000 college fund for my irresponsible sister. Now she abandoned her son, and they want me to drop out to raise him. But my answer left them broken. I'm 22 years old. I'm in my third year of college on a full scholarship that basically saved my life. And I need to tell this story because what happened a few weeks ago still has me up at night wondering if I did the right thing or if I'm the worst person in the world, like my parents say I am. The thing is, my older sister Madison abandoned her 2-year-old son on my parents' doorstep with a note, and they wanted me to drop out of college to raise him. Yeah, you read that right. That I, the younger sister who's never been a mother and hasn't planned on being one for at least the next 10 years, should leave my education to fix Madison's mess. Again. I guess I should start from the beginning so you understand why this is so incredibly frustrating. Madison is 3 years older than me, and for as long as I can remember, she's been, let's say, the black sheep of the family, but one of those black sheep that everyone protects and enables because I don't know. I guess my parents always thought that if they gave her enough love and support, she'd eventually change. Spoiler alert, she didn't change. When I was like 10 years old, Madison was already 13 and had already been suspended from school twice for fighting with other girls. I remember my mom crying in the kitchen and my dad saying things like she's going through a difficult phase. It'll pass. It didn't pass. Madison's teenage years were basically a series of disasters that my parents constantly cleaned up. She got expelled from high school at 16 for selling I don't know what stuff in the bathroom. They never told me exactly what, but we all knew it wasn't candy. My parents transferred her to another school, paid for private tutoring, bought her a new car, thinking that would motivate her. Meanwhile, I was in my room studying to maintain my perfect grades because I already knew from age 12 that if I wanted to get out of that house and go to college, I needed a scholarship because my parents clearly weren't going to be able to pay for anything after spending everything on Madison. And it's not that Madison was mean to me all the time. I mean, there were good moments when we were kids, but as we grew up, she became more resentful of me. I think it's because I was the perfect daughter without even trying. You know what I mean? I just wanted to do my homework and get good grades, and that automatically made me look good compared to her. Madison started making nasty comments about me, calling me the favorite and the nerd, and a couple of times she even hid my important stuff. Like, once I had a final presentation and my USB drive with all the information magically disappeared and I found it 3 days later in the trash can in her room. When I told my parents about it, my mom just said it was probably an accident. Anyway, the time came when I was 17 and applying to colleges. I'd been saving since I was 14. Seriously, every dollar I earned babysitting, working summers at an ice cream shop, whatever I could, I put it in a savings account my dad had helped me open. By the time I got to my senior year of high school, I had like $8,000 saved. It wasn't enough to pay for all of college, obviously, but it was a good cushion, and I was applying for scholarships like crazy. I sent out like 3 scholarship applications a week, wrote essays until 2 in the morning, and when I finally received the acceptance letter from my dream university with a full scholarship that covered tuition and books, I cried. I literally started crying in the middle of the kitchen with the letter in my hands. My mom was there and hugged me and said, "I'm so proud of you." And I thought that finally, something was about me and my achievements. But then my dad came home from work. I told him the news, and he got serious. He sat down at the kitchen table and said, "We need to talk about your savings fund." And I thought, okay, maybe he's going to say he's going to give me more money or something. I don't know. I was in a good mood. But no. What he said was, "Your sister is pregnant." I just stood there like, okay. So, not in a mean way, but I didn't understand what that had to do with me. Madison was 20 years old at that point, living with her boyfriend Tyler in a crappy apartment that my parents helped them pay half the rent for, and they both worked part-time jobs. I mean, they didn't have money, but they weren't my responsibility either. My dad continued explaining that they needed a bigger place for the baby, that Tyler didn't have credit for a mortgage loan, and that they'd found a perfect 2-bedroom apartment that cost $45,000 down payment, and that's when I understood. Before he said it, I already knew what was coming. "Your mother and I have decided to use your savings to help with the down payment on Madison's apartment. We're going to put $37,000 of our savings, and your $8,000 will pay you back eventually. But Madison needs this now, and you have the scholarship, so you don't need that money right away." I couldn't breathe. I literally felt like I was drowning. I told him that was my savings, that I had worked for every penny for 3 years, that the scholarship only covered tuition and books but not housing or food or transportation or anything else. My mom intervened, saying I could live at home and drive to the university, that it was only 40 minutes away, that it wasn't a big deal. 40 minutes. Every day. Round trip. While working and studying. And all this for what? So that Madison, who had never saved $1 in her life and who had been arrested the year before for possession, could have an apartment. We argued for hours. I cried, screamed, told them this wasn't fair, that they'd always put Madison first, that I'd done everything right and this was what I got in return. My dad got angry and said I was being selfish, that family helps each other, that Madison was going to have a baby and needed stability. I asked him why Madison hadn't saved or why Tyler didn't get a better job, and my mom said not everyone has the same opportunities as you. Some people need more help. As if I'd had magical opportunities fallen from the sky and hadn't worked my butt off for the last 3 years. In the end, I had no choice. The account was in my dad's name too because I opened it as a minor, so technically he could take the money out without my permission. He told me he'd do it with or without my blessing, but that he'd prefer I understood it was best for the family. I signed the papers because what else could I do? But I told them that as soon as I turned 18 inches 2 months, I was leaving the house and didn't plan on coming back. And that's what I did. On my 18th birthday, which was like 3 weeks before starting college, I packed all my important stuff in my old car, which I had bought myself, by the way, with my money, and I left. I found a room that an older lady was renting near campus for $350 a month, got a job as a waitress at a restaurant, where they let me do night shifts that didn't interfere with my classes, and basically cut contact with my parents. I mean, I didn't block them or anything dramatic, but I didn't call them, didn't visit them, answered their messages with one-word responses. My mom would call me crying, saying I was hurting her. How could I be so cruel? That Madison had had her baby, a boy named Lucas, and that I hadn't even gone to meet him. And honestly, I didn't care. I know that sounds horrible, but I couldn't pretend to be happy for Madison when she had an apartment bought with my money while I was eating instant ramen 3 times a day to save on food. Almost 2 years went by like that. 2 years where I basically didn't talk to my family, except for occasional messages on holidays. I focused on school, maintained my perfect GPA, made friends, had boyfriends, lived my life. I knew from my mom's Facebook posts, because yes, I stalked them even though I didn't comment, that Madison was still with Tyler, that Lucas was growing up, that my parents saw them often. I also knew they'd converted my old room in the house into a playroom for Lucas for when he'd visit them, which was like the cherry on top, you know? I couldn't even go home during breaks because I no longer had a room. I'd have to sleep on the living room couch while Lucas had my space. Then we get to 3 weeks ago. It was Tuesday. I had a super important organic chemistry exam the next day. I was in the library, studying until 11 at night when my phone started ringing. It was my dad. I didn't answer the first time because I really needed to study. He called again. And again. And again. 6 calls in 10 minutes. I finally answered like, "What's going on?" And he was hysterical, yelling that I needed to come home immediately, that it was an emergency, that it couldn't wait. I asked him what had happened, if someone was hurt, if someone had died, and he just kept saying, "Come home now. I can't explain over the phone." My mom grabbed the phone and was crying, saying please come, that they needed me, that it was about Lucas. And I panicked, thinking something had happened to the kid, like an accident or something. So I told her I'd come in the morning after my exam, because I couldn't miss that exam. It was 30% of my final grade. My dad got furious. He yelled at me that I was selfish. That family was more important than a stupid exam. How could I be so cold? I yelled back that if he couldn't tell me what had happened over the phone, then clearly it wasn't that someone was dead or dying, and that I'd worked too hard to ruin my grade. I hung up. I turned off my phone. I studied all night. I took the exam the next day, came out of there feeling like I'd done pretty well considering I hadn't slept at all, and turned on my phone. I had 43 text messages and 15 missed calls, all from my parents. The messages started worried and became increasingly angry. The last one said things like, "You're a disappointment, and when you finally decide to show up, don't bother coming." I drove to my parents' house directly from the university. I hadn't been there in 2 years. When I arrived, My mom opened the door and looked terrible, like she'd aged 5 years. She didn't sleep last night. She said, "Because of you." I followed her inside, and my dad was in the living room with Lucas, who was playing with some blocks on the floor with no idea about all the drama. Madison wasn't there, neither was Tyler. My mom took me to the kitchen, and that's when I saw the note. It was a crumpled notebook page with Madison's messy handwriting. I read it completely, and it basically said, "I can't do this anymore. Tyler and I are leaving. Lucas stays with you. He'll be better off this way. Don't look for us." And then at the end, there was a line directed specifically at me. To Caroline, "I know you'll be a better mother than me. You've always been better at everything." I stood there, staring at that note, unable to process what it said. I asked my mom when this had happened, and she told me Monday morning, like 36 hours ago. Madison and Tyler left Lucas at the door with a bag of his clothes and that note, and they left. Nobody knew where they were. They weren't answering phones. They had abandoned their son. My dad came into the kitchen and said, "And that's why we needed you to come immediately. But no, your exam was more important." I told him that nobody had explained the situation to me, that if they'd told me Madison abandoned her son, I would have come immediately, but that calling me screaming to come without explaining anything wasn't fair. We started arguing again until my mom interrupted us, saying we needed to focus on Lucas, and that's when they told me everything. Turns out Madison and Tyler had been using drugs. I don't know exactly what, but probably the same stuff Madison was selling in high school, and the situation had gotten much worse in the last 6 months. My parents knew. They'd been to the apartment several times and had found it in terrible conditions. No food in the fridge, Lucas with a dirty diaper for hours, basically child neglect. And they hadn't done anything. They hadn't called CPS. They hadn't tried to get custody of Lucas legally. They just kept giving Madison money, thinking that would help. Now that Madison was gone, my parents had talked to a lawyer and could request temporary custody of Lucas while they found Madison. But here comes the part that made me explode. They told me they couldn't take care of Lucas alone. My dad works full-time, and my mom has back problems that make it difficult to carry a 2-year-old all day. So their solution was for me to drop out of college, move back home, and become Lucas's mom. They didn't say it exactly like that at first. They started with things like just for 1 semester, just until things stabilize, you could take online classes. But when I told them no, that there was no way I was leaving college, the truth came out. My mom started crying, saying I was the only option. That Lucas had mentioned me in Madison's note. That clearly my sister wanted me to take care of him. That it was my family responsibility. I yelled that it wasn't my responsibility. That I hadn't had that kid. That I hadn't neglected him. That I hadn't decided to abandon him at a door like he was an Amazon package. That Madison and Tyler were responsible, and that if they couldn't take care of Lucas, then they needed to call Child Protective Services. My dad told me, how could I suggest such a thing? That putting Lucas in the system would ruin his life, that family takes care of its own problems. And I exploded. I told them they'd never treated me like family, that they'd taken my college savings to buy Madison an apartment, that they'd converted my room into a playroom, that for 2 years they hadn't made any real effort to fix things with me, but now that they needed me, suddenly I was family again, that all my life, they'd put Madison first, cleaned up her messes, paid for her mistakes, and that I was sick of them expecting me to sacrifice my life for someone who had never sacrificed anything for anyone. My mom told me I was being cruel, that Lucas was innocent in all this, and she was right about that. Lucas hadn't done anything wrong, but that didn't mean it was my job to fix the situation. I told them they needed to contact CPS, that it was the right thing to do, that Lucas deserved to be with people who could actually take care of him properly, not with a 2-year-old college student who knew nothing about raising kids and could barely support herself. The argument went on for hours. They tried to make me feel guilty in every possible way. That Lucas needed me. That I was his only hope. That if something bad happened to him in the system, it would be my fault. That Madison obviously had mental health and addiction problems, but that wasn't a reason to turn your back on her son. That family was more important than education. That last one hurt the most, because they were basically telling me that my future, everything I'd worked for, didn't matter compared to fixing Madison's mess again. I told them my final answer. I'm not leaving college. I'm going to finish my degree. If you can't take care of Lucas, you need to seek professional help. Whether it's other family members, social services, or whatever, but it's not going to be me. I left the house with my mom crying in the living room and my dad yelling at me that I was a coward. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. I thought about Lucas, about that 2-year-old boy who didn't understand why his mom had left him, who was probably confused and scared. I thought about whether I was doing the right thing or if I really was as selfish as my parents said. But I also thought about everything I'd sacrificed to get where I was, about the 3 years I worked to save that money they took from me, about the sleepless nights studying to maintain my scholarship, about how hard these 2 years had been living basically alone without family support. I called my best friend and told her everything. She told me I wasn't wrong, that my parents were trying to manipulate me, that I'd done the right thing. I called my boyfriend and he said the same thing. I even called my academic advisor at the university and explained the situation, without too many details, obviously, and she told me under no circumstances should I leave college, that students who interrupt their education rarely come back to finish it. A few days went by where my parents sent me messages saying horrible things, that I was a bad person, that someday I'd regret it, that Madison had disappointed them, but I was worse because I'd had all the opportunities and had decided to be selfish. I didn't answer any of them. I left them on read and continued with my life. About a week ago, my mom called me, this time calmer. She told me they'd talked to the lawyer and had officially requested temporary custody of Lucas, that they'd hired a part-time nanny to help during the day, that they were still trying to find Madison, but so far there were no signs of her or Tyler. She told me she understood my decision even though she didn't support it, and that she hoped someday we could fix our relationship. I don't know what to say to that, honestly. Part of me feels relieved they found a solution. Another part feels guilty because Lucas is growing up without his mom and I could maybe help. But most of me is angry, still, because this never should have gotten to this point. My parents should have intervened when they saw the signs that Madison was using drugs and neglecting Lucas. They should have done something before she got to the point of abandoning him. And I'm also angry because I know that if it were Madison who was in college and I was the one who had abandoned a child, my parents would never have asked her to leave her education. They probably would have found a way to make it work without asking her to sacrifice anything. But since it's me, the responsible daughter who always does the right thing, it was assumed I could carry one more weight. I haven't spoken to them again since that call. I'm finishing the semester now. I'm doing well in my classes, and I'm trying not to think too much about all this. But the nights are difficult because I keep asking myself if I did the right thing. Lucas is 2 years old. He didn't ask for any of this, and technically I could help him. But I also know that if I drop everything now for him, I'd be repeating the same pattern of my whole life of sacrificing myself for Madison's mistakes. And at some point, I have to break that cycle, right? My friends tell me yes, that I did well. My therapist at the university started seeing one after all this, tells me that setting boundaries with toxic family is healthy and necessary. But my parents will probably never forgive me for this. And Madison, if she ever comes back, will probably hate me too for not having done what she wanted me to do according to her note. What kills me is that last line in her note, the one that said I'd always been better at everything, wasn't a compliment. It was resentment. It was her blaming me for having done things right while she did everything wrong. And now, even in her absence, she found a way to make me the bad guy for not cleaning up her biggest mess. It's like I can't escape this no matter what I do. Sometimes I wonder how Lucas is now, if he asks about his mom, if he understands any of what happened. If my parents tell him anything about me or if I pretend I don't exist in his life, it's probably better that he doesn't know me. I guess. That way he won't have to understand someday why his aunt decided not to raise him when his mom abandoned him. The truth is, I don't have a happy ending for this story. Lucas is with my parents under temporary custody. Madison is still missing. I'm still in college, trying to graduate in a year and a half, and my family is more broken than it ever was. But for the first time in my life, I chose something for myself instead of sacrificing myself for Madison. And that has to mean something, right? Even though I feel horrible about it,